Hi, I'm John Morehouse. I'm a principal consultant with Denny Cherry Associates, and cost is actually really important, so I'm kind of excited to talk about it.
So, do you have any good we broke the bank and spent a lot of money on something stories? Because I have one.
Uh, the stories I usually hear are people that are playing around with Azure, or
Hmm.
cloud, and even like other cloud providers too probably have it. But from an Azure perspective, oh, I want to play around with this thing. I want to stand up this huge resource, and then I forgot about it for 6 months. And then Microsoft, of course, rightfully so, sends them a very large bill, for thousands of dollars.
So,
So
so
what's
I've
so
been a
what's your
cloud,
story?
I've been a cloud architect for like I'm going to
A long
go with
time.
13 years. It's been a while,
Yeah,
right? I've
yeah,
been
it's been a
doing this
while.
for a
It's a hot
while.
minute.
I know the ins and outs of cost management in AWS. I know in Azure. I consider myself to be really, really freaking good at this. I think I wrote a blog post about this, but we were building this AI web capture process for my last job where and this was last November where we were doing some pretty cool stuff and we're capturing images of websites, storing them in S3, and then doing OCR on them. Well, we did a trial run and we used a couple of different OCR tools. And the first OCR tool we used was like uh, I can't remember what the name of it in AWS is. I know that the one that cost a lot of money, but it was the one like that Cognitive Services has where it's not the document reader, but it's like it reads text off an image. So that was the first tool we were using, and we ran some tests, and I saw the cost and stuff, and I was like, oh, that's cheap, and I did the math, and I'm like, we're not going to have any problem. Well, the problem was, and this works in Cognitive Services the same way too. It was only capturing like the 3 by 5 at the top. It wasn't capturing the entire text if it was a long image. So, like in Azure, you would use AI document services or whatever they call it this week for that. In Amazon, there's a service called Textract for that. Well, when I reran this with Textract, I I didn't check the pricing for Textract.
Uh-oh.
Uh, I thought it would be pretty similar. Our bill's normally about 6 grand a month for the services we have. We're running a few Kubernetes clusters and some databases, and just kind of all the
That's
associated
all
things with
reasonable.
those adds up to 6 grand a month. Well, I happened to log into the AWS console, and I have the cost management on my front page. That's something, by the way, in Azure, I highly recommend doing, like pinning your cost management dashboard to your front page, just so it's what you see when you log in. And I saw 14 grand for the month of November, and I was
Oops.
like, oh. And sure enough, like a day later, before we had had a chance to call the client's like, hey, why is the AWS bill so high this month? And I'm like, we've screwed up, and don't worry, it won't happen again. Uh, but yeah, anybody can make mistakes. And one of the things that, whenever I talk about cost management, there's two ways things are priced in the cloud. As people who work with databases a lot, our databases tend to be pretty easy. They're pretty expensive. John, assuming you're not using serverless, what's the cost difference between an Azure SQL database if you use it zero or you use it at 100% the entire month?
Not serverless, it's the same price.
Same price. Same thing
Same
with
price.
virtual machines. If you use a virtual machine, 0% CPU, 100% CPU the entire month, unless it's
Same price.
burstable, same price. And even if it's burstable, you just use your burstable credits and then it's slow. Uh, where you can really get in trouble in the cloud and why we're having this discussion that we're ultimately going to be having about budgets and such is variable cost things. Textract, a lot of those AI services in the clouds, there you pay for what you use and you pay for what you consume. Uh, it's really, really important, and probably this is to me the most foundational part of cost management is knowing what the cost model is of what you're using. We talked about SQL database serverless. If you're barely using a database, SQL database serverless is going to be way cheaper than having provision capacity. If
Yep.
you're using the database 24/7, I think it's about 4 times more expensive
Mhm.
than fixed capacity. So it's really important to understand the pricing model of what you're using and designing accordingly. Anything you want to add there?
No, you're spot on. I tell clients all the time, especially with Azure SQL Database Serverless, that and my clients always seem to think that, oh, serverless, it'll save me a bunch of money. but they use it 24/7, and obviously the cost is wrong. It's significantly more expensive to use that SKU for their needs, and so we have to have that conversation. No, you don't want to use serverless in this case because you're going to use it 24/7. It's going to cost you more money.
Yeah, from like my perspective, it can be good to use those serverless kind of resources very early in a project while you're trying to get a feel for what your usage and budget's going to look like. And you might want to anticipate that your costs are going to be either way lower or way higher in that first month while you're figuring that out. And then you settle in. And we're not gonna talk about in detail about reservations and savings plans today. That's going to be in another session because that is the number one way to save money on cloud. Like my favorite thing, and I think this goes back to the early days of the cloud. People are like, "Well, you just turn off your VMs on the weekend and at night, and you'll save money." That A, you don't save that much money, and B, it doesn't scale. Like that works great if you have like Azure subscriptions that look like our demo subscriptions, then you have like 3 VMs. Sure, you'll reduce your cost by like 50%. Try doing that when you have 100 VMs and employees in 8 different time zones. Like it just doesn't work. So reservations, like you can save roughly on the order of like 30 to 70%, depending on how long your reservation term is, how popular your resource type is, all those things. So that's going to be the focus of another episode. And we'll even talk about it a little bit here because in some of the views we're going to talk about in budget, we want to show you how some of those things look because they look a little funny. John, you want to talk about some of the cost management tools that Azure gives us natively now that we have access to in our MVP subs finally?
Yeah, which actually was a really good decision. Like I'm really glad that even though it was a pain in the ass to make it happen, I'm glad that I can sign in and now see some of that cost management stuff. The other thing
for those of you who aren't MVPs, Microsoft started giving us like real money in Azure to use to demo stuff like about 10 years ago. But cost management tooling never worked because the subscriptions were weird. They weren't like standard subscriptions. So last year we had to basically migrate our subscriptions, which was a giant pain. But now we have tooling.
And we had, I was going to say the subscriptions were all messed up. And it was just weird to see for those subscriptions. But the other thing I was going to throw out there is that we probably ought to talk about like dev test subscriptions.
Good point.
Another way to help save some cost, and we can get to it later. But if you've got a team of developers and you're using Visual Studio already, you should really look at using dev test. You can help save some cost there. But anyway, cost management stuff. If you've never looked at your cost management, if you go into the portal, there's a blade there for cost analysis, where you can see all the various resources and what they're costing you. So you can get nice graphs, good dashboards, and you can do things with that, such as like setting budgets. We'll kind of get into it a little bit later, but I've actually got a budget set up on my Azure subscription to alert me when I hit a threshold. Because I don't want that surprise $14,000 bill. Because Microsoft will even make me pay for it. Even as an MVP, we'll have to pay for it too.
It's kind of interesting. One of the things I really like about budgets and that whole subsystem is that it's basically Azure Monitor alerts. Mm-hmm. Like if you worked with Azure Monitor, it's the same concept, just applied to budgets.
Yeah, and the other thing I do like, and this is kind of tied to what we had to do as MVPs last year, is you can have different billing scopes. So I've actually got multiple subscriptions with different billing scopes, but it's all centralized into one spot. So I sign into one tenant, and I can see multiple subscriptions across. I've actually got 2 tenants. My setup might be a little weird, but I've got 2 tenants with multiple subscriptions. But because the billing scope is all tied together now, I can actually see the cost for all those subscriptions in one spot. So I've got a central pane of glass that I can see what I'm costing.
Yeah, in what you're describing, I mean that pattern is very, very common at large enterprises. Like they're gonna like when we were at Microsoft, there were thousands of subscriptions, and I'm sure there are more than one tenant.
I can imagine.
One of the things we're not going to be able to show you if you do work in a large organization and you have an enterprise agreement with Microsoft, if you have an EA, there's an EA portal where some of this stuff rolls up. We don't have access to an EA subscription, so we're going to be demoing the stuff that's available in your more normal costing scenarios. You want to pull up the portal and
Sure. Sure, sure.
Let's start talking through some of the things
Yeah,
here, because I think some of these terms like billing scopes can be a little bit confusing.
that's a good point.
Yeah, so let's like, as always in Azure, we have, while John's pulling that up, I'll talk about the hierarchies we have. At the top level, we have management groups, which allow you to groups, or really at the top level, we have a tenant. Tenant's really an authentication realm. Below that, we have management groups, which allow us to group subscriptions together. So if you had a subscription for prod, a subscription for non-prod, those would all be like in a management group potentially. And like John's showing here, he's got a couple of different scopes that he's defined, and I'll let you kind of walk through this.
Well, so these are, and I mentioned it earlier, these just are the different billing scopes that I have. One is my sponsored subscription from Microsoft. As Joey mentioned, we do get some credits, some real money to play around with Azure resources for demonstration and testing and breaking things. Joey and I are great for breaking Azure things. And so like this top one is actually related to my sponsored subscription that I have, but it's actually tied to a different tenant somewhere else. So I can see that tenant, or I'm sorry, that subscription within the billing scope that you see before you right here in the portal. So I can see a direct cost analysis for that. If I go into cost analysis, this is where we get our really nice charts. Once it comes up.
Megan would probably be disappointed in the donut charts, but
Yeah.
I personally kind of like the donut charts.
I like this chart. This chart is very simple for me. But yeah, Megan probably would be upset.
Yeah.
But we can see here that I've got some Azure SQL databases, I've got some storage accounts, managed instance, and we can see for the past 30 days, and it forecasts, right? So that's one of the things I do like is that it forecasts out to the end of the month, so I can see where I'm going to hit. The red line is my budget, and we'll get into kind of what that looks like here in a minute, but my red line is $1,000 a month. And if I hit my budget, I want to get alerted because I could go over that. And if I go over that, I could burn through my sponsored dollars very, very quickly, which sucks because if I burn through that, then I got to pay for it out of my own pocket. And we don't want that.
Or when you're doing a presentation in June, you're like drawing on a whiteboard instead of showing Azure SQL database.
Yep, showing a database on a whiteboard. But we can see, you can drill into here, right? So this analysis is actually interactive, so I can actually drill into, hey, okay, so Azure SQL Database is a consumer or a larger consumer of my funds. Hey, I want to drill more deeper into that. I can see the different locations, the subscription that it's tied to. We can see that it's tied to my Azure sponsored subscription. So I can see all this information in a good central spot, and then I can do stuff with it. And since we're talking about budgets, I'll just go ahead and talk about budgets. Oh, there it is.
There we go.
Ta-da! So, this actually was a couple months ago. We went to the PASS Data Community Summit last November in beautiful Seattle, Washington. And I had a bunch of resources created because I did a pre-con and I had some sessions. And one of my general sessions was talking about Azure Virtual Machine Disaster Recovery. So I set up a bunch of resources like Recovery Services Vaults, Azure Backup, and I had backups running. And so I was consuming a lot of resources, which was eating into, I think for the month of November, I spent like $2,500. And I forgot to turn it off.
Yeah.
Which is a mistake. And so I caught it and I realized I actually didn't have a budget created. And so I created a budget called Azure Credits. And we can see that my subscription, I set an amount of $1,000 a month. It resets every month. But I wanted an alert that said, if I hit 80% of my budget, email me. And so we can see that it actually emails me on my email address. And so I get an email. Ironically, one thing that I thought was funny was I created the budget and I had already surpassed the budget when I created it. You can see that I created on December 1st of last year. And when I created it, about 3 hours later, I got an email that I had exceeded the budget. And I was like, yeah, I know. I already know I exceeded the budget.
That is one thing to mention about this. Not all of the billing feeds in real time. Generally, it's all there within a day or two, but it's not necessarily immediately real time.
Yeah, and I was okay with that. I just thought it was funny that I set the budget up because I knew that I had already exceeded it, but it emailed me anyways a couple hours later, which just proved that it did what it's supposed to, right? It identified
Yeah,
that I was going to exceed it and notify me.
your example is really good. That's like a kind of a classic scenario of how you use budgeting. One of the other places where I think it's really important to do this is if you're and by the way, we didn't talk. This is scoped to your subscription, right?
Yep. Yeah, this is scope to the subscription.
Can you can you edit it and show the scopes? Because I honestly don't remember if you can scope it. Can you scope it to a management group?
I'm not sure a management group. You can scope it to the subscription, a resource group, or a resource.
Yeah, I knew that. I wasn't 100% sure. I wonder if you could add subscription ID. See if you can add your other subscription. Somebody needs an index on that field.
Yes. Oh no, I cannot.
Okay. Yeah, so you're limited in scope. This is at the subscription level. Not a big deal if you're at an enterprise. You probably have an EA tool to do this. I think there's ways you can probably deploy the. So like we were talking earlier about Azure policy and like force deploying budgets and new subscriptions, so that like you have a default budget that rolls out. So you could apply that policy at the management group level, so it cascaded. Reporting across subscriptions is a little bit trickier, but there are some ways and tools you can do that. But one of the things I wanted to bring up, John, your example is pretty good. If you like, I assume you mostly have a static set of resources that don't change typically, and you're anticipating your budget. Like I think it looked like it was going to be about $400.
Yep.
If it's twice that, you want to know. The other place you want to really use budgets and be way more aggressive than John is, if you have a new app that you're deploying, especially an app that isn't just like a database and a web service, or even a web service that might scale out, you want to set really tight budgets on those things because you want to, especially in the early days of your app, because if your usage starts to go up and you're wildly successful, which is great news, that's cool and all, but you want to know that like the costs are shooting through the roof because this app is wildly successful. So like it's important. You can, like John showed, you can set scopes at multiple levels. So maybe you have a general subscription budget, but it would also be a good idea to set one up at the resource group level for your new app. And one of the reasons why it's so important to group resources together is that cost management aspect.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that's something that I don't see a lot of organizations do in terms of like developing, like to your example of your project last November where the budget doubled. I don't see a lot of. I mean, I don't see a lot of organizations do it within the development process. Do you? I
Yeah,
mean, are your clients doing it?
I should have for that one, but
Yeah, for that one.
yeah, no, like on that project, it's on my dashboard when I log into AWS, so I look at it every day, and that's my budget. But like that's not, I'm leaving that project soon, so that's not as good as say, like actually having an alert set up that goes to the team that if the cost exceeds X, then do that. We're also like that particular project's also, like I mentioned, a situation where everything's fixed. Like it's on RDS and EKS, so we can eat all we want there, and the budget's going to be the same. But if I have like auto mode turned on in Kubernetes, right, where the nodes could scale at, my cost could double or triple, and then you could start to see some real money.
Yeah, and I would say it's also worth noting here, like this cost analysis plane has a great number of resources. Like you can go back and do historical analysis and see what happened, last month, last 30 days, as you can see before you, which is sometimes handy. Like sometimes I've gone in here and like, why the hell did I spend X number of dollars? And so I have to go back and go, oh, I left this resource running. I can go backwards in time to kind of see, like I can go, whoops, last quarter. Once it comes up. See, here you can see I spent a lot more money than I really wanted to.
Yeah, and this is a good place. This is a good thing too. Like I assume most of the people who are watching this video work in technology and have to deal with managers and such. You want to expose your management to this stuff because you don't want
Yeah.
them to be surprised by a bill. You want them to be aware, and. at least if you expose it to them, and you can, there's some report automation here where you can automate the sending of reports. That subscribe button John has right above where his mouse is right now. You can subscribe people to these reports, and that's a good way to make sure your managers, get a weekly email to see what the accumulated costs are, and nobody's really surprised here.
That's a great point.
Yeah. The demos we're doing are pretty basic, and we're kind of showing you the core functionality. It does absolutely get a little bit messier in a large organization, and that's where you want to take advantage of that EA portal, because what that EA portal is going to do is roll up a lot of stuff, not inherently like here we're looking at the scope of a subscription, but being able to have, you can set budgets across subscriptions and things like that in the EA portal that we can't exactly do here, but a lot of the tools are notionally the same. There are also a lot of third-party tools. I don't think there's a ton of benefit in buying those third-party tools. There's a big exception here. If you're operating in a single cloud, the native tools are generally good enough. As you operate across clouds, it gets a little bit trickier to consolidate that billing report. So that's where you might want to evaluate looking at some of the third-party tools.
What another cost-saving thing that we didn't really talk about are CSPs.
Yeah.
We can maybe talk about CSPs too at some point in time, but no, I'm just thinking about cost things that we can.
Yes, CSPs being cloud solution providers, of which DCAC is one.
Yes.
They can offer you a little bit of discount over list price. This is going to be a medium fit. So if you're like not quite in that space where you're big enough to have an EA, and one of the things that's challenging with an EA, the way they work now is you're committing to spend, $10 million a year with Microsoft. And you have to spend that to get that EA discount. Whereas typically the CSP is just going to give you a baseline discount based on what you're spending as a kind of fixed percentage. So if you're not quite in that space where you're big enough to have that EA, that can be beneficial.
And I do not have any reservations.
No reservations.
No.
I wanted I wanted to share something, and this is a screenshot in a slide. So I'm not going to be able to do the cool nav stuff John's doing, but hang on, let me.
Let me stop sharing.
You don't need to stop. I can take over.
Okay.
So this is effectively one of the same screens that John was talking about, but reservations being so important, we have this accumulated cost view. It includes the date range, but what it doesn't show is the reservations cost. And I need to drive down to another screen here. This is the one I was looking for. This is the accumulated versus amortized cost. And the cost analysis by default will show all usage and purchase costs as they show on your invoice, which is known as actual cost, which is good for reconciling those invoices. However, if you bought reservations for a VM in this month, they would show up in your cost. And so amortized cost breaks down those reservation purchases into daily chunks and spreads them over to the duration of the reservation term. So as you're looking at some of these things, and by the way, I know this probably isn't exactly the same screen John was showing. These slides, as you can see, are from June of 2019. But that amortized cost will show you the spread cost of your reservation. And that's just an important thing to make note of, because reservations are, when we'll talk about them in a forthcoming talk, but reservations are really the biggest cost saving mechanism along with savings plans. They're similar but slightly different tools for saving money. But that's how you save money in the cloud. The one other thing we didn't mention, John, that I think is so important and could have fixed your problem is, especially for those of you who are building your own demo subs, is using policy and using that policy to force tagging and then having automation based on those tags. In your case, it would have been tricky because you can't really power down a recovery services vault. But you can power down all your VMs, and you can build your own logic into whatever PowerShell you want to have to do with. And the funny thing about recovery services and backup is you can't, I assume you can't even immediately delete those, right? Like you had to,
correct.
Yeah, you hit delete and you still have the resource for for 2 weeks.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then I had to clean it up. And to your point about automation and tagging, like anytime now when I build a development VM, I automatically schedule it to shut down.
Hmm.
I could do automation to like at a global higher level,
Yeah.
but we did a migration for a client and they has a couple VMs in development space, and we just automatically said, hey, we're going to configure it to shut down at 10 o'clock at night, your local time. That way you don't have to worry about it.
AWS does not have that button.
Really?
Yeah, Azure has this button basically. That's a little annoying because it will shut down a VM at a given time, but there's no. If you, it's funny
no
if you look in Azure Automation there are pre-built runbooks you can use that are like open source there,
Yep.
and the top like 50 of them are all automate starting up and shutting down VMs because the built-in thing only shuts them down. But AWS doesn't even have that. You can do it obviously, but you have to do it yourself. I thought that was kind of amusing.
I love that we can shut them down, but
Yeah, we can shut them down, but somebody has to be able to start them up. I had this weird scenario where like, oh, it wasn't that, it was a firewall rule. I had a customer where they had to have the ability to like dynamically create firewall rules because their corporate VPN blocked 1433. And so they needed to be able to access a SQL database, but they never knew what their IP was going to be. So we couldn't give them portal access because they could see even with too much. I was like, are you comfortable running scripts? And the guy was like, yeah, I'm a dev. I'm like, okay. So I just gave him the create firewall rule privilege. And then you could do just that using the PowerShell command line. But yeah, logically tag your resources, and then you can do some automation, especially in your own sub. It's good practice.
it is.
And it
I
lets
agree.
you
I agree.
it lets you drive automation. That's really the key thing there. And then you could kind of have like tying into the budget. So having the budget's good, but like having budget and automation that powers your stuff down in a demo sub, that's really a good belt and suspenders approach.
Agreed. Agreed.
And watch out for your use of AI tools because they can get expensive really fast.
They can get expensive very fast.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think we kind of gave you an overview of some of the tooling. We're going to dive deeper into cost management in the next couple of slides. This is something I had built a 2-day class on. So there's some kind of interesting things we can talk about philosophies. And I think a lot of stuff you hear from the cloud providers is kind of self-serving. So we're going to dive into some of the myths that they talk about going forward. And like, how you can best manage your cost.
I think this is important stuff that doesn't get talked about.
No, cost management's not super exciting.
Yeah, it's not.
And it's funny, depending on the size of your company, people may not care. I remember saving $11 million on the Comcast licensing bill, and my boss was like, that's really cool, and I appreciate it, but and I'll put it in your review, but $11 million isn't anything to Comcast.
I mean, if they don't want it, I'll be happy to take it.
Yeah, I was like, I can take it and never see you again. And
yes. Pay off my house.
Yeah. And buy another one.
Yes, and buy another one.
Yeah. So, all right. Thanks, everyone. Like and subscribe, and join us again for the next series of this cost management session.
Sweet.
All right, bye.